how to define the data types, right? So by default, what it is doing, PySpark is itself detecting the data types and loading the data into the data. So we want to define our own data types, right? Our own data types, and then we want to create the data frame, insert some data into the data frame. So for that, what we have to do, we have to use structure type. Structure type. I mean the structure type. The full definition is structure type, but the command will be structure type. So within that structure, so what are all the fields? The structure fields that you want to define, that you can define. So like that, so we have the column name defined, and then what we will define? We will define the data type for that. So in the PySpark, so we have different data types, right? Integer, so we call it as integer type, decimal type, binary types. So the same data type that we have uh, in the SQL, same data types, most of the data type that we have, except very few map type something. So that we'll discuss, except few are exceptions. Most of the data types like decimal, integer, binary, boolean, string, all the data types are same that are exist in the SQL server. So that's why if you know the SQL, PySpark is very easy, just a kind of matter of syntax. So now first name, and then so we have to define the data type as string, right? So now, okay, this is a struct field. Now what I want to do, I want to define another column. This is a definition of one field. I want to define another column. So I will just copy paste this. So I want to keep the last name as a column. And I will put the comma. And then I want to define salary. So this time salary won't be string. So I want to define as integer type. Integer type. So these three columns I want for the first time. Now, this is my schema. Obviously, so you can define the data for this, right? So how can I define the data? So if you go here, data is equal to, so you have to define the set. So within the set, you have to define the tuples, multiple tuples. So you can pass any number of rows by separating the commas. So first name will be anything. So and you can specify quotes if you want, because this is a string. And then last name you can keep M, and then salary that you want to keep in 1000. Now second record you can keep anything. The last name might be anything, and you can keep 2000. Something like this. We can define. Now, so as we know, so how to create the data from df is equal to spark dot create data frame of data is equal to data, comma, schema is equal to schema. So this is the name that we have used, right? So just try to execute this. So what did he say? We have written command called as struct type. We have written a command called as struct type, but it is not able to find this command. Not able to find this command. The reason behind that is, so we have to import this command. We have to import this command from the Spy, PySpark.sql.types library. So which library we have to use here? From PySpark, PySpark dot SQL dot types import star. Import star. Import star means it will import all the commands that we can use. Okay, that we can use from this library, from this PySpark.sql.types library. Right. So what it is complaining about? So it is complaining about data type class PySpark.string type should be instead of okay. So here instead of star we can use struct to type. So we want to import struct to type, struct to field, string type, integer type. So let's see what will happen. PySpark dot SQL dot types. Okay, dot this one. Let me say string type should be an instance of a class. The data type. Okay, so the spelling mistake is there. Struct to field. No, right? There is no spelling mistake. So it is complaining about that. Okay, so I think so here I forgot to mention this one here. So the function we have to define. So that is the issue that it is throwing. Okay. So I mean little tricky. So even though you practice a daily basis, you will get some this up. Okay. So here we have to specify the function after that. Okay. You have to open like string type function. Okay. Not only keyword should work, string type. So here should also work. They just try to execute this. It should also work. Either you can specify the structure type, structure field, string type, integer type. So what you are saying, I wanna use this structure type, structure field, string type, integer type commands. I want to import from this library. PySpark.sql.types has all these commands. So you have to use this command from PySpark.sql.types. From this, what do you want to import? You want to specifically import structure type, structure field, string type, and integer type. So here you can use the star also. Means it will import all the commands from this library. So it's not a best practice to use star unless it is required. So we can specify the what are all the commands that you want to play with. I want to import that only. So now I got the data frame is created. So I can go and see that data dm.show. So it will basically show me show me the columns and the data. If you want to see the schema of it, so we can see like df dot print the schema. So if you execute this, just it will show you what are all the data types that you have, what are all the data types that you have defined. String and integer, correct? So that is what you have defined here. So this is how you can basically try to use try to use the struct field and struct type data. I mean to use your own data types, right? So this is one thing. This is a kind of extension to this, the first example and this example. So that these commands you have to remember. Now, same way, within that struct type and struct field, okay. So I want to define a decimal value. So integer is fine, but I want to define some decimal value. So how can I specify the decimal value in the struct type? Struct type, right? So for that, what you have to do? So I will use this same. Okay, I will use this same in the below. I will just try to use this in the single in the below cell instead of modifying that. Okay. Along with this, I want to define some decimal value, right? So so here I can put comma, uh, not here, and here I want to define salary as not integer because salary might have the decimals, right? So decimal type. So I want to define precision and scale. Precision means how many numbers that you want to keep, and after that, uh, how much of scale that you want to keep, right? So here, what I want to do, I can define like 20, and I can define like 30. Define like 20 and 30. Why? Because uh, what? So decimals will have the scale and the precision, correct? So now, what I want to do, I want to execute this. So just go and click on run. Shift plus enter. It will throw an error. It will throw an error. Okay. So what error it is throwing? Length of the object is not which with the length of the fields. Okay. So sorry. It should throw a different error. So just click on shifted enter. So it should show. Okay. So it's saying that by default decimal type of 18, 3 cannot accept object 1000.2 in a type class float. The type class float. So what exactly mean by this? What exactly meant by this? So first thing is here it is, even though you have specified some value, it is considering as a float type. So if you just define this as a float type, so just shift and enter. Okay, so just I will remove this and shift and enter. So okay, so now what we will do, we will import float type here and then execute. So close and open brackets should also work. So let's execute. Now it is executed without any issues, right? So if you see the data df dot show, you just execute this. So it is showing decimal values correctly. Now we are able to attach the data with the data types perfectly. If you define as a float type, it is taking as a float. It is taking as a float value instead of decimal value. But define, when you basically try to define as a decimal, it is throwing an error, isn't it? It is throwing an error, right? The reason behind that is, so you have to make some changes in order to use the decimal data type. Okay. So by default, if you specify the column value dot the value dot decimal values, by default it will be taking as a float unless you manually go and specify. So it will be treated as a float only. So if you want to manually go and define it as a decimal, then only it will be treated as a decimal. Otherwise, it will throw an error. It will throw an error. So how do we go and display that? How do we go and map it as a decimal value? So for that, what we have to do? So we have to use import here, and then so here we have to make some changes here. Decimal type 18 comma 3, 18 comma 3. So here, while defining, so you have to make it as decimal. You have to keep it as a decimal. You have to specify the keyword like decimal. Decimal of this. You have to define decimal of this. So just go and execute. The decimal is not defined. I think you should also you have to use this decimal from decimal, I guess, to call this. It is throwing an error, so it will be, it should be using. So here we are specifying the decimal type only. Here I think we have to import, right, only import decimal. Let's see. Let's see. It is saying that decimal is not found. Import decimal. Just I will comment out. Just execute this. It is throwing an error. So, or it is unable to, just give me a minute. I'm trying to figure it out. Okay. So, uh, so importing decimal type. So here I think we need to use the library called as decimal only here. That's what I used. But so here uh, I missed some keywords like from decimal. Okay, from decimal, I think import decimal. I have to use the caps. So let's try. Just remove this. So here I have to use the caps. Okay, that is little some syntactical things that if you don't remember, it will throw an error. See, it doesn't make any difference between this and this. From decimal, import to decimal. So D in caps and uh, this D in a small. I earlier what I mentioned, import decimal from decimal. It is throwing an error. What I missed? I missed to just display capital T. So that much case sensitive it is. That is the issue. In SQL, we don't have this problem. Okay. So that's why if you remember the commands also, sometimes if you do some, if you don't remember in which place you have to specify the caps and small, so that will throw an error. So now what we did, we have used even if you use, okay, I will comment this out. For decimal, this is the heading. So same like float and int and string, I want to use this decimal type, but it is throwing an error. That is a confusing thing. Okay, so it will basically uh, throw an error sometimes. Okay, but right now, if you don't use this also, right? If you don't use this also, it is basically trying to. It is basically working. Either you can use this or you can use this. But if you don't use decibel over here, it will throw an error. You have to use the decibel over here. So if you are using the decibel type over there, so here if you don't use this decibel, so it will throw an error. So that is a confusing thing. So if you just execute this, it will not execute. It will throw an error. It is always expecting that unless you go and specify decibel, so it will not use the decibel data type. It will try to use as a treat as a float. That's why it is throwing an error. So that's why it is very confusing sometimes. Okay. So that you have to uh, remember. Most of the times we will be using the float only, unless there is a special requirement, we will be using this decimal type. Okay. So here, in that case, you have to use the decimal of 1000, 20. This one, if you insert the data manually into the data frame, but that is we never do that. We never insert the data manually. Okay, so that's why you don't face any issues frequently. Okay, now if you go and execute, if you go and execute, so okay, it will run. So the catch here is, so if you don't use my decimal type here, so you can also either use like this, import decimal from decimal, and you can use decimal keyword. This is mandatory over here. Either you can use the library like this, or you can just comment it out and then try to try to use decimal type over here. Okay, decimal type, decimal type. So anything is fine. Okay, so just click on execute. So it is perfectly executing. Right. So this is the whole story uh, about. This is the whole story about the introduction of, so how to create the columns and the data, append the data, and also try to define the data types within the data frame. Okay. So any queries until this? Okay, so if you don't have any queries, so we will end the session here and continue discussing the transformations on the data frame on daily basis.